Hi, I'm Haig Papazian. That's how you pronounce my name. Uh, Usually everybody messes it up here. They say Haig or Hug or Aik or Papazian, Papazian, all of it. So one more time, it's Papazian and it's Haig Papazian. If you don't know my name by now, that's it. Haig Papazian. Say my name. Say it. David, say my name.
Sure. Haig Papazian.
Okay. So I was born in Beirut, actually east of Beirut, the Armenian neighborhood. It's called Burchamud. Uh, it's for the first kind of like 5 years of my life, I probably thought that I was living in Armenia just because everyone around me was Armenian, and I went to an Armenian school, and we didn't have like much electricity growing up because of the civil war, so we didn't have a lot of TV to watch to hear any of the Arabic stuff, and everything around like the signage, the streets, everything was in Armenian. Later on, I kind of like figured out that Armenia was geographically somewhere else, and I was living in Lebanon, a country which is it's a complicated, weird place that you love to hate and hate to love and love to hate. It goes in phases. But when I was growing up, like I think after 15, 16, 17, once I started like studying architecture, I kind of like, so technically the Armenian neighborhood is on the eastern side of the Beirut River, which separates Beirut from Greater Beirut. I never crossed the river when I was a kid. So crossing the river, I guess, and going to the other side for university, for school to study, it just like opened up a whole other world for me. And yeah, I went to the American University of Beirut for my architectural studies. I sort of like got in there by chance. I feel like a lot of things in my life, decisions happened by chance, but I kind of, I don't know. I feel like I worked on it, but I didn't know that it could have, all the series of events that probably have happened, I wouldn't have imagined back then, I guess like when I was like 17, 18, 19, that it would have brought me here right now in New York to be your neighbor, Mr. David, and for a few more days, then I have to move out. So okay, we did a lot of like fast forward. Let's go back a little bit. So 17 years old, I started studying architecture. Let's go a little bit back more. When I was a kid, I used to really enjoy drawing. I was a quiet kid. I used to draw a lot, and I used to draw well. My school teachers, my dad was a teacher in Arabic literature and philosophy. He was a professor, but then he ended up like teaching in the Armenian schools to teach kind of like these 3 generations of Armenians actually how to speak Arabic, because it wasn't our first language, and Armenians are what's the word for it? They're like survivors of the genocide. You know, they arrived in Lebanon and they were given like this. They were staying in a camp for like a couple of years, and the camp burnt down, and then they started moving into the city, and it was very difficult to integrate back then. Even though Lebanon is like a multicultural, like very diverse neighborhood, but as part of the Middle East, you have 18 different religious sects, and you have all these different cultural influences like throughout history. But I guess the Armenians always had this idea that probably they're going to go home, which is somehow it's like politics involved, the French politics. The Sykes-Picot kind of like drew the map of the Middle East, and then the Ottoman Empire had fallen already, so they had promised that they're going to give them back Armenia. It was just a big mess. Anyway, the Armenians ended up staying for 3 generations. And yeah, so I was at school. At school, I went to the same school that my dad used to teach Arabic. So I remember when I was a kid, like the other like teachers would complain to my dad that your son, he's like smart, he's doing well in his exams and everything, but during the classes, like he doesn't listen to us, he doesn't focus, and he's just drawing, like scribbling like on his book, you know. He's quiet, he's just like, he asks like questions every once in a while, but the rest of the time he's not focused. He's just like drawing portraits of sad women. And I was like, sort of like doing that. I don't know why I would draw a lot of faces, and fast forward in my 20s, I became friends with those women. And yeah, they're kind of like the ones who have been like supporting me the last couple of years emotionally, because Arab men, they don't have like this expression of, you know, emotions and stuff. We're kind of expected to be, you know, all macho. I don't know where the story is gonna be very all over the place, back and forth. Don't try to put it chronologically. Don't edit it. Imagine there was a movie in Lebanon, Memento. Have you seen it? You know what they did? In Lebanon, you have this when what do you call it? The censorship office, which is run by the church, and instead of like putting the film like as is Memento, they were like, it doesn't make sense, so they chopped it off and they edited the whole thing chronologically so that people can watch it in the cinemas. So the censorship in Lebanon is kind of like weird, but anyway, that's something that I guess I got to learn later on in my life. So I used to draw, and then I think I was 7 or 8 years old. I have an older brother and an older sister. My brother wanted to learn how to play the guitar, and he was trying to convince my dad, let's go to music school. So my dad decided to take us all and sign us up for music school, and I wanted to learn. I don't know. I don't know what instrument I was going to choose. I think I was going to choose an anun or a oud, just because I thought that the more the strings, the more difficult it is. I was kind of like, I used to challenge myself like all the time. So, but we went to the Armenian music school, and they didn't have those instruments. They had a violin. I remember there was like some like guy who was playing the violin, and I was like, okay, like I want to be like that. And that's when I started playing the violin. I was good. But when I started, so fast forward, I started studying architecture, and it just opened up like a lot of doors for me. Just architecture school in Beirut, especially like at the American University of Beirut, it's a mixture of a lot of things. You know, there's a bit of sociology, cultural history, art history, urbanism, anthropology. Like you think about like all of these things while you're thinking about like designing a building. So I don't know. For me, it was just kind of like mind blowing, and it was the same department as the graphic design department. So I took like a lot of like those classes as well, like animation and film, and poster making, and I don't know. I would spend a lot of time there. Uh, that was in the west part of Beirut, the university, and it was all kind of like new to me. It was just the first time that I go to that part of the city, and all of a sudden, like I had a whole city to explore. And Beirut's one of those places where every neighborhood has its own identity. It has its own kind of like little bubble as well. And sometimes they intersect, sometimes they don't. I guess like everybody has like their own version of Beirut because uh, based on where they live, who they hang out with, uh, and the neighborhoods that they kind of go through like on a daily basis. Sometimes you end up like not going to a whole set of like Beirut. It happens like to most cities as well, but Beirut's a small city, you know, like you can't not go through like certain neighborhoods like ever. So it's kind of like you live in all of like the downtown area of Manhattan, and you uh, never go to, let's say, Washington Square Park, you know? It's weird. But it's, yeah. But as an architect, I guess like it was a way just to explore like everything and just go all over the place. Uh, yeah, those were cool years. I think things were like my childhood was good, and my teens were better. And my 20s were like every year was just getting better and better. And just because I would have never imagined like things to go that way. I mean, my parents weren't super rich. I mean, they weren't rich at all. So we didn't have a car. Like we sort of like didn't do much like when I was a kid. And yeah, just being exposed to all of this was kind of new to me. And yeah, I guess like usually Armenian families, they have like this cultural thing that goes in them, which is people playing music, drawing, the artistic side of things. It's part of the keeping the culture alive. So yeah, so first year architecture school, I think my music violin professor, violin teacher, wanted me to join like the orchestra to have like music as my career. And he didn't like the fact that I was spending way too much time in architecture school, like and on my architectural projects. And he wanted me to play the violin like 8-9 hours a day back then. I mean, at that point, like it was my 10th, 11th year in doing violin. So I was working to pay for university, and then like it was just, there was no time for that. And then we had a big argument at some point, and I just stopped going. And I stopped playing for almost 2 years. I would just play it sometimes at home, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't like the classical Armenian training that I was doing like before. And I think it was like third year of architecture school or third year of architecture in around like 2006. So Lebanon 2005, the 90s in Lebanon and early 2000s were like the calm, good years. You know, we grew up like the war had just ended, so we didn't really experience the war too much. Like I was like 4 or 5 when the war ended in Lebanon, the civil war. It was like 15 years. The same warlords ended up like going to Taif, and then they pardoned each other, and then came back as like for the government members wearing suits, and they put their guns down. And so yeah, so it was just like the same corrupt kind of government. And then Syria's involvement like in the politics in Lebanon was just too big. In 2005, they assassinated the prime minister back then, and it was right next to the university. It was the first year that we went to the university, and there was a lot of people died. It was just it was on Valentine's Day. So Valentine's Day in Lebanon was no more celebrated. And it just became like a thing, you know, like that's the first time something like that happens. And the year that followed, there were like all these protests. The first big protest actually that everybody was just, they wanted like the Syrian government, like out of the Syrian army out of Lebanon. They protested and then they toppled the government. It was kind of it was called the Cedar Revolution. So we used to go down like to the streets to protest. We were like 17, 18. We were just kind of, when you're young and you just want to change the world. So it was that attitude. But that year, like every Friday, there would be like a bomb somewhere. Nobody knows who would plant them, but it was just like random streets. And 2006 was another kind of like weird year that Israel sort of like did an assault like on Lebanon for like 30 days, 33 days. They just like bombed like the hell out of the country, all the infrastructure, everything. And it was just like unparalleled, like a kind of, it's when I realized also like that the media outside is like so biased when it comes to stuff like this. It'll be like the headlines, like a friend of mine for graphic design, like final dissertation, she did a research on the front cover of the New York Times during those 33 days. It'll be like a bomb fell in somewhere like in a city in Israel, scaring off like kind of like the population. It's so dangerous, blah, blah, blah. And then a really small kind of like thing, 66 children and people and whatever dead in Lebanon. The other one there'll be like Lebanon Hezbollah or Lebanon trying to kill Israelis, and then the other side, 66 children dead. Like as if, how did they die? Nobody knows. It's just like you realize that things are kind of like unfair. But it wasn't just that. It was kind of the Arabs themselves, I guess, like in all the Arab world. It's weird. Like they've made this pan-Arabism, but they're all very different, and all of them have like their dictators. So it was just, they weren't really nice to themselves as well. At architecture school, that's when we kind of like decided, I think me and a friend of mine, after seeing another classmate do like a concert in the university, like with another band, I guess, like a cover band. They were just doing like cover music. We're like, you know what? We all play music like, in this department, and we haven't been doing like what we like. So let's just start a band, our own band. And one of the rules was everybody has to be from our department, architecture and graphic design, and they need, I don't know, it wasn't a cover band. We had to write original music, and at least like our hours are kind of like similar than the rest of the departments on campus. So at least like we could work around our times, at night, during the day. And yeah, we started playing, in the beginning it was like, me and Umayya, our friend, we put up like a poster on the board at the department. And we just like asked people to join. And in the beginning it was like 14, 15 people, and then it just coming and it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna do it. But then the numbers like went down to like 7, 8. And by the time we did our first concert in front of the department, in front of the building, it was, we were like 7 people back then. And we called ourselves like Mashra Leila because, I mean, we came up with a lot of names, a lot of different explanations, but we were just Mashra Leila means like almost like a night's project or an overnight project. Just the way that we used to work in the architecture school. Stay overnight, work on our design stuff, and treat music together like as a design project where, I mean, that was our process, where we write together, we work together. It was more of a group kind of experience. And we never thought that it was going to be that big. I think the first year we did like a lot of shows like all over Lebanon, in different cities, villages, which is unheard of usually for Lebanese bands. Most Lebanese bands were cover bands. They would sing in English or French, and uh, yeah, we just wanted to write music that we would like to hear, because we I don't know, there wasn't any music in Arabic that sort of we could relate to. Everything was this bubblegum pop, you know, recycled love stories, and yeah, we just wanted to be that, you know, 18, 19-year-old revolutionary kid who wanted to change the world. So, and yeah, so we started doing that, and I guess like people quickly, I don't know, back then it was a word of mouth. It was like we had the Facebook, YouTube had just started, so all of a sudden like people were just coming to our shows in like big numbers. And then the Arab Spring happened, and we had just released our album. Somehow like our music crossed over to the rest of the Arab world, and they, like in Egypt, like people would just listen to the music and then go down to Tahrir Square for the demonstrations. Like in Tunis and in Morocco, they use it afterward. Even like in Syria, the earlier days in the revolution, we were supposed to go to Syria actually in May 2011, and then got cancelled because the thing had just started, the protests, and that was probably like the same lifespan of our career. I mean, yeah. 2011 also was the first year that we ended up playing shows in Europe, and I don't know. We never expected it to be like this. You know, when I finished my architectural studies, I started working as an architect, so music wasn't the main thing. But I mean, after like a year of that, we started playing more shows, so I had to take time off, and then the rest of the guys finished school, and the same, like all of a sudden we were just playing like these impressive kind of like big festivals in the Arab world. We were just, the Western media was just writing about us, Arabic media was writing about us. We were kind of like given these big labels, you know, just the soundtrack of the Arab Revolution, or the voice of the Arab youth, which is kind of a little bit of a generalization, because I mean, we're from Lebanon, and the rest of the Arab world is completely different, you know. You don't ask any American artist, you know, do you represent like I don't know, the whole continent, you know? It's kind of like a bit of a big weight. But they just kept on doing it. It was kind of like these sexy titles, you know, and that probably like worked positively like for our kind of like sake as well. But we realized that we have a platform, so we should use it like to make some sort of a change, you know, advocate for things that we believe in, and we talk about like in our music. So back then, 2010 was our first album released. We did a couple of like fun music videos with friends of ours. 2011 we released an EP. Then 2013 released our other album. We recorded it in Montreal. We went to Montreal at Hotel Tatango Studios, and we spent like a month there with a friend of ours, Radwan Mumne. He recorded the album with him, and that's when we probably did our first North American show. And then 2015, we did our first American tour. We had done like some shows in the UK, in Europe, big ones. In the same time, like I was doing a lot of different things. At some point, we had all quit architecture school. I was doing a couple of like art programs, like residencies here and there, because still, the music was taking a lot of our times, but then we had chunks that were completely free, so we needed to balance between the both. And I did my grad school in London as well. I was there for 2 years. But in the meantime, like, our travel schedule became so crazy that, like, every weekend, like, I was traveling somewhere like Egypt or Tunis or Lebanon or like Turkey, like all these places to just do shows and come back to class and be like, yes, architectural history. Let's talk about this building. It was fun, to be honest. Like, I don't know how I did well. I don't know how I managed, like, now looking back. I never thought that I was going to leave the Armenian neighborhood in Lebanon, or even like Lebanon, you know, and live outside. So I had already like done internships in Paris as an architect. I had like did my grad school, and yeah, 2015 was our first U.S. tour. In 2016 was our second U.S. tour, which was almost like 20 cities, like all around, like East Coast, West Coast, like in the middle. And 2016 was also the year that we had released our new album, the fourth album, which was released at the Barbican in London. It was like televised like all over the Arab world, like live. It was like a big deal for us. And it was also the year that we got banned in Jordan the first time for being too cool for school. No, they were like, our music, they said that our music is at odds with the traditions and the values of Jordanian society. And also, like, we shouldn't play in the Roman amphitheater in Amman because it's disgraceful for us, like, to play, because our music is like so vulgar, like, according to some religious figures. And this was 2016, and we had already played like at that site 5 times before that. When we play in Amman, it's the only time where fans from Palestine and Syria could come and watch us, because we couldn't play in those places. 1, because there was war, and 2, because of the state of Israel. As like Lebanese, we can't go to Palestine. So when that happened, actually, there was the first time there was a huge media kind of. That's the thing, like, the media all talks about things when they want to. They like to frame certain stories, you know, based on the politics of like that newspaper or their countries. So back then it was just, everybody was like, what the fuck, Jordan? And Jordan kind of like unbanned us, and then they had their Ministry of Tourism sponsor our concert in the same place, and then the parliament sort of like met a week before the concert, and they kind of like signed a document to completely like ban us, like it's permanently. Because also like the second time they said that we're promoting homosexuality and we're promoting revolutions against government, and we're kind of like a Western satanic group. So that happened, and then that kind of had a domino effect, I guess, in the Arab world. Egypt was our biggest kind of like probably like audience. Our shows would be like 20, 30, 35,000 people usually. And our last show in Egypt was in 2017. So it was the biggest like we've had like in Egypt, 35,000 people. And it was a few days before we would come to New York to teach at NYU. We had a course, it was like a workshop seminar course on music and politics. And yeah, we did the show, and then we were on our way to New York, and then all of a sudden, like, we look at Twitter, and there's kind of like it's a huge like scandal like in Egypt, because there were two kids who raised the rainbow flag during our show in support of the band, and kind of like how what we stand for after the Jordan kind of like ban. And during the show, like it was a beautiful moment, you know, to see the flag, because we saw it like from stage, and then all of a sudden, yeah, it's, I don't know how the internet, the yeah, it was the whole thing was shocking. Like it's all of a sudden, like from getting like offers to play like stadiums like in Alexandria and Cairo, we had like every single like TV station, every single program, every single newspaper for like a week or 2 weeks talking about morality and about how it was kind of like a 35,000 people like orgy, and we're kind of like we have a sexy, I don't know, satanic sex cult. It was just like the most, and yeah, they were accusing us of like debauchery. And there's a law of debauchery that's kind of like left from the British mandate, like over Egypt, that's in the constitution there. So they're using that law to ban us. But then also they arrested a lot of people, a lot of like LGBTQ plus community people that they were arresting like off of like probably like the apps, social apps, and tricking them. There was like for a couple of years already they'd done that, like which is secret police would fake accounts and then they would just meet with someone and then confiscate their phone if there are like any pictures that would any information that would show that they're doing something in like their, what's the word? Anyway, it's a long story short. It was that was kind of like the beginning of like the sad part of the band story. Even though like we were getting more and more success, but we were getting banned in the rest of the Arab world. At that point, like we had almost like lost like most of our revenues as well, because we make money like from, we would be making like money from the concerts. But still, it was, I mean, it was great that you banned the band from playing, but the music is still, you know, out there, that people have access to it. So we kept on releasing music, and we had our 10th anniversary show in 2019. The Egypt thing was kind of like tough. At some point, like we were thinking of like breaking up, just because it was like it was already, we were like under so much pressure, you know. Every other time like something happens, like the band's like also in the spotlight, you know, and we were doing more we were fighting governments rather than like doing music at that point, which I mean, sure, we've done like so many projects, you know, like with Greenpeace, with like different kind of like human rights organizations. But at that point, we were tired of like just doing all of that. We were kind of like burnt out. We just wanted to write music. So we released our 10th anniversary album, and we started writing our 5th album as well. And we did the tour like in Europe. Like we played in kind of like iconic venues and big festivals that we've always like dreamt to play. Like we played in Olympia, we played in Roundhouse in London, Rock en Seine Festival, like all of the big ones in Lowlands in Holland. And yeah, it was, and then we did the American tour for it. But when the show in Lebanon, which is like where we're from, was gonna happen, it was like middle of August. We had just done a show here in New York at the Met Museum. It was called the Vessel Orchestra. And it was just mind-blowing, you know. We were at the top of our game, like musically, and things were really, we're having these collaborations with people that we've dreamt of having, like Roisin Murphy, Hercules Love Affair, Joe Goddard from Hot Chip, and it was just kind of like the biggest like shock that we had, which was our show was people were calling, a priest was calling for our show to be cancelled and saying that, yeah, we're blasphemous and we're Satanists and whatever shit, crazy shit that probably we're like, no one's gonna believe that, you know, like it's Lebanon's like the only country where you have kind of like freedom of speech when it comes to just journalism and all of that. But I guess, I don't know, like back then with WhatsApp, with the social media, Facebook and stuff, like they started making these fake videos and you could just circulate, you know, you could broadcast those videos on WhatsApp and send it like in masses, like to 10 people, 20 people. Now they've changed it, I guess, because things like that, when you allow for things like that to happen, it's just, you're spreading like a lot of like false news, fake news. And one of the videos was like us and Celine Dion having a secret satanic cult where we're trying to make kids homosexual. It was just like this complete nonsense with these weird music. And this is a church, you know? And I mean, if the church has to say something, then the kind of like the sheikh has to say something in return as well. It's just like all of a sudden, like for 2 weeks, the whole country was talking about us, you know, but at the same time, the Lebanese economy had crashed. And I guess like it was a way for them to divert people's attention from all of that. It's even in Egypt when it's, I don't know, that's like a whole other story to talk about maybe another day. So yeah, so that Lebanon thing was, I had already moved here to New York because we had the shows like in the US we were preparing for, and I was dating someone in DC. So it was, but my visa was a performer visa. I had to go back. There was like an arrest warrant. I had to wait in like Paris for like a couple of weeks. And back then I had to go back to renew my visa for the US, and then we had like our tour in the US. And then when we were doing the tour in the US, it was just too intense, you know. It was already like everything that happened in Lebanon was very heavy. The tours were like, the shows were all kind of like sold out, you know, 2,000 people, 3,000 people, 1,500 people here in the venues. But we were completely like burnt out, and by the end of it, like I think we were dead. Like we weren't really happy about like how things were going. And then the protests in Lebanon started. Fast forward, the economy crashes, the banks in Lebanon steal the whole country, everybody's like saving accounts. All of a sudden, like I'm stuck here in New York, unable to go to Lebanon because they reopened the case, and my visa was a P1 visa. That I had to figure out like what to do with it, and then the COVID starts, and then everything shuts down, and my whole life savings like gone, and every band member is in a different city, stuck. We're trying to write our 5th album, like finish it like online on Zoom calls and stuff like that, but it was already like getting very, very tense between us, like with everything happening. We were trying to figure out, you know, everybody's trying to figure out like their own little, how they're gonna survive. And I remember back then, the previous administration here had like all these weird laws kind of like against so that like non-immigrant work visa holders won't be able to renew their visas, or will have to leave. So yeah, I was just trying to do like everything to figure that out, because going back to Lebanon wasn't an option for me, and with a Lebanese passport you can't go anywhere at this point. I'd broken up with my ex, and it was just a weird time. I tried to apply for an O1, but then yeah, they started like the visa stuff, and then I I got a scholarship from NYU just to be able to get a student visa, and then there was a student visa ban. And the pandemic was, when it started, it was actually like the first time that I felt like, I don't know, that I could do something when, like the whole world has kind of like stopped. Because I feel like for the band, like our world was kind of like rocky for like the year before that. And all of a sudden I had to just deal with all of that while trying to, most people here, I guess in the US, don't really know much about what's happening in the rest of the world. So, especially so when you're from the rest of the world, you feel like a little alienated because your whole world is falling apart and your friends want to go like to a restaurant or to go party, somewhere. So, yeah. And then, things were really going on in Lebanon. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And then, the Beirut explosion blast happened. And then that was kind of like the cherry on top. Just half the city got destroyed, and many people lost their homes. 300,000 people lost their homes. 200 people died like on the spot. So many died like afterwards from injuries. Around like 10,000 people were injured. It's all of the neighborhoods like around the port, which is the Armenian neighborhood, or the artistic neighborhood, were completely like destroyed. Like it was just a horrible, horrible news. And dealing with that from here was when most people kind of like heard about it, but they were just, for them it was like a movie, almost like they were treating it like, oh wow, did you see that explosion? Cool. And I was like, it was weird for me, yeah, to see like everything fall apart. Anyway, at that point, with the band, like we did one show to raise funds for Lebanon with Mika, and we decided to kind of like take a pause, try to figure out, what the next steps are for each of us, because everybody's world was completely like upside down at this point. And yeah, for me, to be honest, like it's easy, like New York's not a city for someone, for immigrants and for people who don't have money. So I was kind of like on both levels, kind of like I don't know if I should have stayed here, but I stayed, and I got a residency with AFI, Artistic Freedom Initiative, who was working with my visa, so I got an O1 visa with them. And last year I've kind of been working on a project in living in West Bath. It's kind of weird doing that because there was a lot of work put into it, and a lot of like it's a massive project, but with no budget and with doing everything alone. I had to always kind of like, it's just anyway, it's a whole new chapter now. So now, actually, next week I don't know where I'm going. So fingers crossed, it's gonna be exciting. Yeah. And some pose. Thank you.